Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Streets of Rage 2, also known as Bare Knuckle 2, originally in arcades and Sega Genesis, but it's been ported to all sorts of systems, and what you're seeing here is footage recorded from the Sega Genesis Classics collection, which is available on Steam. This is a side-scrolling beat-em-up by Sega that was first released in 1992 and later saw release across a lot of different systems in numerous collections. It's been ported directly to other systems like the Game Gear, and it's even been thrown into other series collections and other games as a sort of extra Easter egg. And so it's pretty easy to find a working copy of this game, whether you want to go with the original Genesis experience or Mega Drive, depending on which region you're in, of course, or go with one of the ports or one of the emulated things like what you get on PC. It's pretty readily available, and so the question really becomes, is it worth picking up? At the time, it did get a really, really good reception. People generally loved it. And of course, people generally loved the original game, myself included. So, the question really becomes, how does this stack up against the original? And is it still worth playing to this day? Well, before we really get into the meat of the game, let's first talk about the presentation, which is easily a step up in terms of visuals. The original game looked fine for what it was, but this thing took it to a completely different level and made the graphics actually really, really good for the time. The sprite work is pretty well detailed, animations are generally fairly smooth and fluid for this particular era, and there's just so much detail packed into everything from the environments to the characters, and everything is just so bright and colorful and full of this great visual atmosphere that you can't help but love it. It's really a timeless game as far as its visuals go. So, they did a phenomenal job back in the day with it, and it still looks good even now. But what really steals the show here is the sound design, particularly the music by Yuzo Koshiro. If you've heard the soundtrack to the original game, you know that it was utterly fantastic. It was this kind of electronic dance music, techno style stuff. And he upped the ante with this particular soundtrack. Took in a lot more influences, and it was really a soundtrack that was almost ahead of its time, where it just took all of these different influences from all these different genres of music, mashed it together, and made an utterly fantastic soundtrack across the board. There are a couple of songs I don't particularly like, but that's mostly because that's going to happen in any game ever. So, as for the rest of the sound design, they were certainly no slouch there either. The sound effects themselves are all pretty beefy, and you really do feel like you're just kicking the living crap out of all these various thugs. You got these very nice, hard-hitting sound effects for what you're dealing with here, which is a Sega Genesis chip. And that bears mentioning. The Sega Genesis sound chip was really not the best around, and what they managed to do with it is pretty astounding. That everything is so crisp and clear and just really, really good in this thing as far as the sound goes is incredibly impressive. And you really don't feel like it's aged poorly or anything like that. It all fits exactly where it's supposed to as a side-scrolling beat-em-up from the early 90s. But obviously what really matter here are the story and the gameplay, and the story in this is really simplistic and basically just set up for the rest of the game. The idea is that Adam from the original Streets of Rage has been captured by Mr. X, who was thought dead, but has returned to wreak havoc upon the city once again. And so Axel and Blaze have to get together with a couple of other people who are Max Thunder, which is a friend of Axel's. He's a professional wrestler, as well as Adam's brother, Skate. And they have to go forth and defeat Mr. X and rescue Adam. That's really your entire plot in a nutshell. There's not a huge amount to it, and really it's just the opening cutscene and the ending cutscene. That's it. So really it certainly falls to the gameplay to make up for the practically non-existent storyline. Obviously you don't really expect that much from a story in a side-scrolling beat-em-up anyway, but the gameplay here is pretty much the same idea as the original Streets of Rage. You walk to the right, you beat the living crap out of any of the thugs that pop up in your way, you have a boss fight at the end of the stage, and then you progress to the next stage. You do have score, which is increased by obviously beating up enemies, as well as managing to get to the end of the level with a certain amount of time remaining, with a certain amount of health remaining, so on and so forth. That's bonuses, as well as picking up various bonus items while in the game, which are money, or gold bars, or something like that. And as you go through the level, you will obviously be beating the crap out of enemies with your basic attacks, which are just some basic punches and kicks, as well as things like jump kicks. You can throw enemies, you can flip over them and slam them into the ground, or depending on what character you are, different things will happen. And that's one of the more interesting things about this game. In the original Streets of Rage, all of the characters had fairly similar movesets. They pretty much all did the exact same thing. The difference was really the animations, the amount of damage they did, and how fast they were. Here you actually can tell differences between the various characters because they each have their own movesets. For example, Axel is pretty much exactly as he was in the original Streets of Rage. Only this time he has a thing where he just does a more powerful uppercut if you double tap a direction and press the punch button. All of the characters have an ability sort of like this, where you double tap a direction and you press punch. Obviously, in Axel's case, as I've mentioned, it's an uppercut. In Max's case, he actually slides on the ground, sort of like the thugs do. In Skate's case, if you double tap a direction, he'll actually start sprinting, or in his case, really rolling because he's on rollerblades. And then if you do the punch while actually dashing, then he'll basically launch himself forward in a cannonball sort of thing. Blaze has a sort of flip maneuver that she does, and each character's special move has been replaced. In the original game, you basically called in support, and it would be a police car that would show up, and then they would launch some attack on every foe on the screen and just wipe them out. This time around, you have a special move per each character. If you're just standing still and you press the A button, which is the default anyway, then you will basically do a 360-degree attack. If you press a direction and do it, then you're going to do something else. For example, with Blaze, she actually does this move that later became kind of her signature move, which is called the Kikasho, where it's kind of like a Hadouken, but not really. It's more like the Koken if you played as Yuri in, I want to say, King of Fighters. I can't remember exactly what game she's from. But it's a short-range kind of energy attack, so to speak. And other characters do other things as well, like Skate will actually launch himself up in the air and then do a spiral downward kick. Things like that. So each character actually plays pretty differently. In addition to having different movesets, they also have different stats. Some of them are faster than others, some of them hit harder than others. Obviously, Max is the most powerful of the characters, but he's the slowest. Axel's a pretty good middle-of-the-road kind of guy. Blaze and Skate are the faster characters, with Skate being the fastest, but basically the weakest. And unlike the original game, where Blaze was almost useless because she was just so weak compared to both Adam and Axel, in this one she's actually pretty useful because they decided to up the ante with her moveset and make her basically hit more, hit a bit harder because she does a bit more damage than she did in the original game, and basically because she's faster and more agile, she's a lot more useful. And you may think about Skate being kind of pathetic because he's on rollerblades and things like that, but he's actually one of the most powerful characters in the game. In fact, he's almost too powerful. The real issue that you get with this particular game is that the super moves that you have are almost too powerful. The way they balance them out is that you actually lose health whenever you use them. Unless you're doing the basic double tap punch thing. If you're doing the normal 360-degree attack or the more powerful things like the Kikasho or whatever, then that actually consumes part of your health bar. So you have to keep that in mind when you're actually using them. And really, those are more powerful attacks that are really meant to be used more on bosses and things like that. Speaking of bosses, again, each stage has an end boss, and the bosses in this are pretty well varied. Oddly enough, a bit more so than the original game, where pretty much everybody was kind of the same idea. Some of them dashed across the screen, but most of the time they were fairly straightforward bosses. This time around, they decided to make things a bit more ridiculous, so you have things like guys on jetpacks, guys who just kind of jump around all over the place, that sort of thing. And so they're still pretty unique and occasionally annoying, like in the case of the guy with the jetpack. But it makes things pretty interesting when you're actually playing, because there's a lot more variety than the original game. And the foundation of really, really solid beat-em-up gameplay in the original game is still there. It's just that everything was improved. Literally everything. It just plays so much smoother. All of the movesets are so much more varied. It actually gives you a reason to pick between the various characters, as opposed to just choosing, well, do I want to do a bit more damage or not more damage? And so what they really did here was they took what Streets of Rage did and pretty much perfected it. Obviously the game's not 100% perfect or anything like that, but they refined that gameplay to such a degree that it really does shine as the best game in the series, and one of the best beat-em-up games ever made, if not the best. Between the fantastic gameplay, the wonderful soundtrack, the crisp, clean visuals with tons of color and style, with tons of atmosphere going on, there's something to like here, period. Whether you like only one bit, or the entire game, or several parts of the game, there's something to like here. And even if you're not really a fan of beat-em-ups, you might actually be convinced by this, because it's really that good. Obviously, if you're a fan of the genre, you need to have a copy in your collection. It just goes without saying. And even for the rest of you, I still highly recommend it. Some games just stand the test of time, and this is definitely one of them. It's one of the best examples of its genre, if not the best of its genre. And really, if you were looking at all to get into beat-em-ups, this is really a great place to start. I'll have a link in the video description box where you can pick up the version of the game I'm playing in this video if you want. Thanks for watching.